close your eyes, the final whistle. The crowd screams Diego, and for a second he feels eternal. But when the cameras switch off, the real game begins. There's a place no one shows you, Hell's Valley of Fame, where applause turns into pressure and worship becomes a trap. And the testimony you're about to hear swears they saw Maradona there. Not on the pitch, but deep inside that valley. And I'll say just one thing, the last part of this story will leave you unsettled.
I did not die in a church. I did not die with my hands clasped in prayer or with a Bible on my chest. I died screaming at a television screen with a mouthful of warm beer, wearing a synthetic blue jersey that mattered more to me than my own skin. My name is Matteo. If you met me 5 years ago, you would not have seen a bad man. I was a construction worker. I laid brick and poured concrete for 12 hours a day under the hot sun of Buenos Aires to put food on the table. I did not steal. I did not kill. I loved my children, in my own distant way. But I had a God that demanded my total devotion, a God that required my Sundays, my money, and my heart. That God was football. To understand why I ended up where I did, you have to understand that for men like me, the stadium is not just a building. It is a cathedral. The players are not just athletes. They are saints walking on grass. And the man we called D10S, Diego, he was the high priest of everything we believed in. We did not just watch the games. We suffered them. We bled with them. When our team lost, the house was silent and cold for 3 days. When they won, we felt immortal. That Sunday was the championship final. The air in the city was so heavy with humidity and tension, you could taste the electricity on your tongue. I remember the morning vividly. My wife, Elena, was in the kitchen making breakfast. She had the radio on, listening to a preacher. Eleanor was a woman of deep faith, the kind of faith that annoyed me because it was so steady. She spent her mornings watching Christian testimonies on her phone, crying over stories of drug addicts finding Jesus, or criminals finding redemption. I walked into the kitchen, already wearing my jersey, already nervous about the match that was 6 hours away. She looked at me with those sad, patient eyes. She tried to show me one of those videos. She said, "Matteo, look at this. These are powerful testimonies of what God can do. Just give him 5 minutes." I swatted her hand away. I told her I did not have time for fairy tales. I told her that evangelical testimonies were just emotional theatre for old women and people who were too weak to handle life. I remember the hurt in her eyes, but I did not care. I had a pre-game ritual to attend to. I had to meet the boys at the bar. I had to prepare my spirit for the 90 minutes that would define my year. I left the house without kissing her goodbye. That is the regret that sits in my chest like a stone every single day. I chose the game over her. I chose the noise over her quiet love. The bar was called El Templo, a small greasy place with peeling paint and a television mounted in the corner that flickered whenever a heavy truck drove by outside. It smelled of stale tobacco and fried onions. To me, it was holy ground. It was packed that day. You could barely move. We were all there, shoulder to shoulder, a sea of blue and white, chanting songs that sounded like hymns. I remember talking to my friend, Lucas, before kickoff. We were debating the legacy of players. We spoke about them with more reverence than priests speak about the apostles. I remember saying that I would give my right arm to see us lift the cup. I said it so casually. We say these things all the time. I would die for this team. I would sell my soul for a win. We do not realize that the spiritual realm is listening. We do not realize that our words are contracts. The match started, and the world outside the bar ceased to exist. My heart was pounding against my ribs, hard and irregular. I had been feeling a dull ache in my left shoulder for weeks, a tightness in my jaw that I blamed on stress and hard labor. I ignored it. I was 45 years old, strong as an ox. I did not have time for doctors. I had a game to watch. The first half was a war. Fouls, yellow cards, missed chances. The stress was unbearable. I was drinking faster than usual, trying to numb the anxiety, but it only made the blood rush hotter in my veins. I remember shouting insults at the referee, words so vile they blackened the air. I was not just angry, I was possessed by the game. My identity was wrapped up in those 11 men running on a field. If they won, I was a winner. If they lost, I was a failure. It is a pathetic way to live, hanging your worth on the actions of strangers who do not know your name. But that was my life. I sometimes wonder how many people watching this right now are the same. You might not worship football. Maybe it is your career. Maybe it is your reputation. Maybe it is money. But we all have something that sits on the throne of our hearts. And if that thing is not God, it is an idol that will eventually crush you. I had seen impactful testimonies of people warned by dreams or visions, but I was too proud to listen. I thought I was in control. Halftime came, and I went outside to smoke. The heat of the afternoon was suffocating. I felt dizzy. The sidewalk seemed to tilt under my boots. Lucas asked me if I was okay. I told him it was just the nerves. I told him my heart couldn't take the suspense. It was a joke. We laughed. I threw the cigarette down and stomped on it, eager to get back inside. I did not know I was stomping out the last few minutes of my life. The second half began. The opposing team scored in the 60th minute. The bar went silent. It was a funeral silence. I felt a rage building in my stomach that was physical. I slammed my fist on the table, spilling beer everywhere. I cursed God. I cursed the players. I felt a sharp pinch in the center of my chest, like someone had stuck a hot needle between my ribs. I rubbed it, grimacing, but I did not look away from the screen. Then, in the 88th minute, the miracle happened. Our striker broke through the defense. He was alone with the goalkeeper. The entire bar stood up as one organism. I held my breath. The pinch in my chest expanded into a crushing weight, as if a bag of wet cement had been placed on my lungs. He shot. The ball hit the net. The room exploded. I've never heard noise like that. Men were hugging, crying, screaming. I threw my head back and roared. I screamed with everything I had, a release of pure, unadulterated worship for the game. And then the hammer fell. It wasn't like in the movies. I didn't clutch my arm and gasp. It was sudden and absolute. It felt like a bomb had detonated inside my ribcage. The pain was blinding, a white-hot supernova that erased the room, the TV and the cheering. My vision tunneled. The sound of the celebration warped, slowing down, turning into a deep, terrifying drone. I tried to reach for the table to steady myself, but my hand wouldn't obey. I felt my legs give way. I hit the floor hard. The smell of the dirty floorboards, dust, old beer, and shoes rushed into my nose. I tried to speak. I wanted to say, "Help me." I wanted to call for Elena, but my mouth opened and no sound came out. I looked up. I saw the underside of the table. I saw the legs of my friends jumping up and down. They were celebrating. They didn't know I was dying. They were cheering for a goal while I was slipping out of the world. The irony was perfect and cruel. The thing I loved more than life was blinding everyone to my death. The pain in my chest vanished, replaced by a coldness that started in my feet and shot up to my neck. The darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision wasn't black. It was a grey, static fog. I felt a terrible detachment. I wasn't Matteo anymore. I was just a failing biological machine. My last thought on this earth was not a prayer. It was not a goodbye to my children. It was a flash of anger that I would miss the extra time. That is how sick my soul was. Even in death, the idol held on to me. Then the noise stopped. The cheering cut off instantly, as if someone had pulled a plug. The grey fog swallowed me whole. I felt a sensation of falling, a stomach-lurching drop like when an elevator cable snaps. Down, down, down. I expected nothingness. I expected the end, But I did not get the end. I woke up. I was lying on a surface that felt like concrete, but it was wet and slimy. It was pitch black. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes, assuming I was in the hospital basement, or maybe I had passed out in the bathroom of the bar. I tried to sit up, and my body felt heavy, distinct, but different. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by a deep, vibrating terror that pricked at the back of my neck. "Lucas!" I called out. My voice sounded flat. There was no echo. The air was thick and hot, much hotter than the Buenos Aires summer. It smelled of sulfur, yes, but also of something else, something organic and rotting, like meat left out in the sun for a week. I stood up, my hands trembling. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a tunnel. It looked like the player tunnel of a stadium, but it was made of rough, ancient stone that oozed a dark liquid. The floor was sticky. I looked down at my feet. I was still wearing my jersey. I was still wearing my jeans and work boots. At the end of the tunnel, far ahead, I saw a dim, reddish light, and I heard a sound. It was the sound of a crowd. Relief washed over me for a split second. I thought, I made it. I'm at the stadium. I thought maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe the heart attack was a hallucination. I started to walk toward the light, drawn to the familiar sound of the chant. But as I got closer, the relief turned to ice in my veins. The chanting was wrong. It wasn't the rhythmic, joyful singing of fans. It was disjointed, discordant. It was a cacophony of millions of voices screaming in different languages, but the rhythm was aggressive, hateful. They weren't cheering for a team. They were screaming for blood. I stopped walking. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run back into the darkness. But the tunnel behind me had vanished. There was a wall of solid rock where I had just been. The only way was forward. The heat coming from the end of the tunnel was intensifying, making my skin prickle. It felt like standing in front of an open oven door. I forced myself to take another step, then another. The noise grew louder, a physical force that vibrated in my teeth. I stepped out of the tunnel and into the light. I was expecting a stadium, and I got one. But it was a stadium built by insanity. The scale of it was impossible. It stretched up into a sky that wasn't blue, but a swirling bruised purple choked with thick black smoke. The stands went up forever, towering miles into the air, packed with dark, shifting shapes that writhed and screamed. But it was the field that made me fall to my knees. There was no grass. The field was vast, the size of a city, and it was paved with jagged metal shards, broken glass, and burning coals. And running across it were thousands of figures. Men in jerseys, men in kits from every era. They were running, sprinting, their faces twisted in agony, chased by things that looked like dogs, but were the size of horses, skinned and bleeding fire. I saw a man near the edge of the field, close to where I stood, frozen in horror. He was wearing the colours of a rival team. He was exhausted, his chest heaving, his legs bleeding from the sharp terrain. He looked at me. His eyes were not human anymore. They were voids of pure despair. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out, only a dry rattle. A deep, mocking voice boomed over the stadium, louder than thunder. It didn't come from speakers, it came from the air itself. "Kick off!" The ground beneath me shook. I scrambled back, trying to find cover, but there was nowhere to hide. I was in the arena of the idols. I was in the place where the things we worship destroy us. I realized then, with a clarity that shattered my mind, that I had not just watched the game. I had lost the game of life. And now I was in overtime. The smell of burning flesh hit me, and I gagged. This wasn't a metaphor. This wasn't a bad dream. This was the penalty box for souls who traded the creator for the creation. And I was just another fan who had bought a ticket to his own damnation. I huddled against the cold stone of the tunnel exit, watching the horror unfold on the field. praying to a God I had ignored for 40 years to wake me up. But you don't wake up from this. You only go deeper. And I was about to meet the captains of this team. I stood frozen at the mouth of that tunnel. My boots were glued to the stone floor by fear. In life, walking out of the tunnel onto the pitch is the dream of every boy in Argentina. You imagine the roar, the confetti, the smell of fresh-cut grass. You imagine glory. But here, the glory was dead. I forced my eyes to look at the ground in front of me. From a distance, it had looked like a dark, manicured field. Up close, the illusion fell apart. It was not grass. The field was a carpet of millions of jagged, rusted metal shards. They were shaped like blades of grass, yes, but they were razor-sharp iron, sticking up from a soil that looked like coagulated oil. Every inch of that field was designed to cut. There was no safe place to step. There was no place to rest. I looked up at the stands. In the stadium, I went to every Sunday. The stands were concrete and plastic seats. Here, the architecture was made of bones and black rock that seemed to pulse as if it were alive. The seats went up so high they vanished into the toxic clouds above. And they were full. But the things sitting in them were not human. They were shadows. Massive, shifting forms darker than the dark around them. They didn't have distinct faces, but I could feel their eyes. Millions of eyes, burning with a cold, predatory hunger, all fixed on the field. They weren't cheering for a team to win. They were cheering for pain. Every time one of the runners on the field tripped and fell onto the metal blades, a roar of laughter would erupt from the stands that shook my bones. It was a sound devoid of joy. It was the sound of pure malice. I pressed my back harder against the tunnel wall, trying to make myself invisible. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. I am in a coma, I told myself. I am in the hospital having a nightmare caused by the drugs. But the smell told me the truth. Dreams don't smell like this. The air was thick with the stench of burning sulfur and something sweet and metallic. Blood. It coated the back of my throat. I could taste the iron. I could feel the heat blistering the skin on my face. This was realer than the bar floor I had collapsed on. This was realer than the jersey on my back. A realization hit me then, heavy and suffocating. I had spent my life worshipping this sport. I had called the stadium my church. I had called the players my gods. And now, the true God, the one I had mocked, had given me exactly what I wanted. He had given me an eternity in the stadium. But he had stripped away the lie. This was the spiritual reality of my idol. This was what lay behind the shiny trophies and the million-dollar contracts. It was a meat grinder for souls. I watched the field again. The figures running were human. They were wearing kits from different teams, different eras. Some looked like players from the 1970s, with short shorts and long hair. Others looked modern. They were running in circles, endlessly. And then I saw the beasts. Chasing them were creatures that looked like hounds, but they were wrong. They were too wide, too low to the ground, with skin that looked like wet red muscle exposed to the air. They didn't bark. They made a clicking sound, like snapping bone. They snapped at the heels of the runners, forcing them to keep moving, forcing them to run over the razor grass, even as their feet were sliced to ribbons. "Run!" the crowd screamed. "Play! Play for us!" The voices were thunderous, a mixture of every language, but I understood them perfectly in my mind. They were mocking the very thing these men had lived for. You wanted to be watched. You wanted to be famous. You wanted to be worshipped. Run! I saw a man near the sideline, about 50 meters from me. He was wearing a goalkeeper's jersey. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, sobbing. The metal blades sliced into his legs. He looked up at the stands, hands raised, begging for mercy. "Water!" he screamed. "Please, just a drop." The response from the crowd was a barrage of burning coals. They rained down from the dark stands like glowing hail, pelting his skin. He shrieked and scrambled back to his feet, forced to keep running by the pain. My stomach churned. I recognized him. Not by name, but by the face. I had seen his picture on trading cards when I was a boy. He was a legend, a hero, and here he was nothing but entertainment for demons. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and stinging. "No," I whispered. "This isn't fair. We just loved the game. We just wanted to watch the game." "Is that all?" a voice whispered inside my head. It wasn't audibly spoken, but it resonated in my chest. "Did you just watch? Or did you give it your heart? Did you give it your Sunday mornings? Did you give it the passion that belonged to your Creator?" The guilt crushed me. I thought of Elena. I thought of how I yelled at her when she tried to talk about Jesus during the World Cup. I thought of how I spent money on tickets when we needed repairs on the house. I thought of how I taught my son the names of the starting 11 before I taught him the names of the apostles. I had built a shrine in my living room. I had built a shrine in my heart. And now I was standing in the center of that shrine, and it was on fire. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to wake up. But you cannot close your eyes in hell. Your eyelids feel like they have been cut away. You are forced to witness. I took a step back, trying to retreat into the tunnel, but something blocked my path. The air behind me had turned solid. There was no going back. The only way was onto the field. I was about to step onto the jagged metal when I saw him. Far out in the center of the field, surrounded by a pack of the red hounds, was a short, stocky figure. He had a number 10 on his back. The jersey was dirty, torn and stained with soot, but I knew that silhouette better than I knew my own father's silhouette. My heart stopped. It was him, the golden boy, the one we called God. He wasn't running like a champion. He was limping. He was hunched over, carrying something heavy on his back. As he turned slightly, I saw what it was. It was a massive golden ball, but it looked incredibly heavy, crushing his spine. Chains were wrapped around his neck, dragging behind him, digging into the turf. He looked exhausted, broken. "Diego!" I screamed. I couldn't help it. It was instinct. He didn't hear me over the roar of the demonic crowd. Or maybe he did, and he didn't care. In this place, the connection between fan and idol was severed. He couldn't save me. He couldn't even save himself. The horror of seeing my hero in chains was worse than the heat, worse than the smell. It shattered the last piece of my worldview. If he was here, if the man who gave joy to millions was here, then the rules of the world I lived in were a lie. The applause of men meant nothing. The trophies meant nothing. I was watching the most famous man in my country being hunted like an animal, and there was absolutely nothing I could do but watch. I stepped onto the field. I had no choice. The invisible wall behind me pushed me forward with a pressure that felt like a giant hand against my spine. My work boots, thick leather meant for construction sites, offered no protection. The moment my weight settled on the turf, I felt the soles slice open. The jagged metal shards that made up the field punched through the rubber and bit into the soles of my feet. The pain was sharp and immediate, shooting up my legs like an electric shock. I gasped, stumbling forward, trying to find a patch of flat ground. But there was no flat ground. There was only the endless ocean of rusted blades, coated in that black, oily slime. Every step was a fresh laceration. Every step was a punishment for walking a path that did not lead to God. I was now inside the game. From the tunnel, the field had looked chaotic. From the inside, it was a choreographed nightmare. The players, hundreds of them, were not running randomly. They were being herded. The demonic hounds I had seen earlier were coordinating their attacks, driving the souls into specific zones of the arena where the torture was specialized. I limped toward the center, my eyes locked on the figure with the number 10 on his back. My heart was breaking with every beat. This was the man whose poster hung in my son's bedroom. This was the man whose name I had tattooed on my calf. In my mind, he was untouchable. He was eternal. But here, he was small. He was hunched over, his breathing ragged and wet, sounding like a broken radiator. The golden ball strapped to his back was enormous, perhaps 3 times the size of a regulation football, and it seemed to be made of solid, molten lead. It glowed with a heat that scorched the fabric of his jersey and blistered the skin of his neck. I got close enough to see his face. I wish I had not. It was him, but it was a ruin of him. The face that had smiled from 1,000 magazine covers was twisted into a permanent mask of anguish. His skin was grey and leathery, covered in sores. His lips were cracked and bleeding, but it was his eyes that terrified me. They were wide, unblinking, and filled with a frantic, animalistic terror. There was no intelligence left in them. There was no strategy. There was only the instinct to escape pain that could not be escaped. He was dribbling a ball, but it wasn't a ball. It was a heavy iron sphere covered in spikes. Every time he kicked it, I could hear the bones in his foot shatter. The sound was dry and sickening. Snap, kick, snap, kick. And instantly, the bones would knit back together, resetting just so they could be broken again on the next stride. "Diego!" I shouted again, my voice cracking. "It's me! I'm a fan! I loved you!" He stopped. For a second, the hounds hung back, their jaws dripping saliva that sizzled when it hit the metal grass. He turned his head slowly, the chains around his neck clanking like a death knell. He looked right at me. I expected him to ask for help. I expected him to recognize the colors of the national team on my jersey. Instead, his face contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. "You," he rasped. His voice was not the voice I remembered. It was grinding gravel. "You did this!" I recoiled, confused. "Me?" "No, Diego. I worshipped you. I cheered for you." "You worship me!" he screamed, and the sound was so loud it vibrated in my teeth. "You made me a god. You put me on a pedestal where only the Almighty belongs. You fed the beast of my pride. Look at me. Look at what your love bought me." He lunged at me, his eyes burning with accusation. "Every cheer was a coal. Every prayer you made to me was a chain. You stole the glory from heaven and gave it to a man who could not carry it. And now I carry it all." He gestured violently to the burning golden sphere crushed against his spine. "This is your adoration. This is your applause. It burns. It never stops burning." I fell back, terrified by his rage. He wasn't a victim of the demons. He was a victim of us. We, the fans, the millions, who treated a sport like a religion. We had built this hell for him, brick by brick, shout by shout. We had elevated a mortal man to a divine status, and the weight of that idolatry had crushed him. Suddenly, a whistle blew. It wasn't a referee's whistle. It was a shriek that sounded like a steam train breaking. A demon appeared from the smoke. It was 10 feet tall, dressed in a mockery of a referee's uniform, black and white stripes painted directly onto its scaly black skin. It held a whip in one hand and a red card in the other. The card was glowing like a hot iron. "Delay of game!" the demon roared. It cracked the whip. The lash struck Diego across the face, slicing open his cheek. He howled, a sound so full of despair that it made me want to rip my own ears off. He turned and began to run again, kicking the spiked ball, weeping as his bones shattered over and over. "Run, idol," the demon laughed. "Run for your believers. They are watching. Put on a show." I watched him limp away, dragging his chains, disappearing into the smog of the arena. My hero. My god. Reduced to an eternal entertainment for the entities of the pit. I stood there trembling, the blood from my feet pooling on the metal blades. I realized then that evangelical testimonies I had mocked were not just stories. They were warnings about the hierarchy of the universe. You cannot place a human being on the throne of your life without destroying both yourself and them. But the stadium was not done with me. The demon referee turned its black, shark-like eyes toward me. It smiled, revealing rows of needle teeth. "New player," it hissed. "You are not wearing the uniform." I looked down at my jersey. It was the blue and white replica I had bought with money I should have used for my daughter's school fees. I am wearing the colors," I stammered. "No," the demon said, stepping closer. The heat radiating from its body was unbearable. "That is the cloth of the earth. Here, We wear the truth. It reached out with a hand that looked like a charred claw and ripped the jersey from my body. The fabric didn't just tear, it disintegrated into ash instantly. I was left standing bare-chested in the freezing, burning air of the arena. You wanted to be part of the team, the demon sneered. You wanted to bleed for the colors. Now you will wear the weight of your devotion. It snapped its fingers. Suddenly, a heavy weight materialized on my shoulders. It wasn't a golden ball like Diego's. It was a yoke. A rough, splintered wooden yoke, like oxen wear in the fields. But it was wrapped in barbed wire. I buckled under the weight, my knees slamming into the metal grass. The barbs dug into my neck and shoulders. Blood began to flow, hot and sticky, down my back. "What is this?" I cried out, struggling to stand. "The season ticket," the demon mocked. "This is the burden of every hour you stole from your family to watch the game. This is the weight of every Sunday you ignored the call of God to sit in a bar. You loved the yoke of the world? Now wear it." I tried to pull it off, but my hands passed through the wood as if it was smoke, yet the weight remained solid. It was spiritual weight made physical. I was carrying my own sin, and it was heavier than any concrete block I had ever lifted on a construction site. "Get up!" the demon commanded, raising the whip. "The match never ends here. Move!" I forced myself to stand. My legs were shaking, my feet were mangled. The pain was absolute, encompassing every nerve ending in my body. I looked around the arena. I saw other fans now, thousands of them, men like me, women like me. They were all wandering the field, carrying yokes, carrying heavy televisions strapped to their backs, carrying kegs of beer that leaked boiling acid. They were wandering aimlessly, looking for an exit, looking for a score, looking for a reason. But there was no score. The scoreboard hanging high in the smog was broken, flashing random, nonsensical symbols in red neon. Error, error, eternity. I began to walk. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew that if I stopped, the whip would come. I walked past a group of men arguing. They were screaming at each other about a penalty kick from a game that happened 20 years ago. They were tearing at each other's faces with their fingernails, locked in an eternal argument that meant nothing. "It was a foul!" one screamed, gouging the eyes of the other. "He dived!" the other shrieked, biting the first man's ear. They didn't even notice they were in hell. They were so consumed by the idol of the argument, the idol of being right, that they were oblivious to the demons watching them and laughing. I walked past them, tears streaming down my face. I thought of my wife. I thought of how she used to sit in the living room with her Bible, praying for me while I screamed at the TV in the other room. I used to think she was boring. I used to think she was missing out on life. Now I knew she was the only one who had been truly alive. I was the one who had been dead for years. The tunnel was gone. The exit was gone. I was trapped in the infinite game, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was a participant in the suffering I had paid to watch. But the worst was yet to come. The demon referee blew the whistle again. The ground rumbled. The metal grass began to vibrate. "Substitutions!" the voice boomed from the sky. The ground in front of me cracked open. A fissure appeared, widening into a dark pit. And rising out of that pit were not demons and not players. Rising out of the pit were the things I had sacrificed. I saw a vision rising from the smoke. It was a table, my kitchen table. Sitting at it were my children. But they looked starved. They looked grey. They were looking at an empty chair, my chair. And then I saw myself, or a version of myself, sitting in front of a TV, turning my back on them. The demon leaned close to my ear, its breath smelling of rotting corpses. "Time for the replay," it whispered. "Let's watch your greatest highlights." The smoke above the stadium swirled and thickened, forming a massive rectangular shape. It was a screen, a jumbotron, just like the ones in the professional stadiums, but this one was the size of a mountain. It crackled with static, a sound that felt like sandpaper rubbing against my exposed brain. "Watch the screen," the demon referee bellowed, cracking his whip near my ear. "Watch the highlights of your career." I did not want to look. I knew what was coming, but in this place, you have no eyelids. Your head is held in place by an invisible vice. You are forced to witness the truth you spent a lifetime ignoring. The screen flickered to life. The image was crystal clear, sharper than reality. It was my living room. The date flashed in the corner in burning red letters. June 15th, 2014. I remembered that day. It was a World Cup match. I was sitting in my armchair, the one I never let anyone else touch. I was wearing my lucky jersey. On the screen, I saw myself. I looked manic. My face was flushed red with adrenaline and alcohol. I was screaming at the television, veins bulging in my neck. Then the camera panned down. Sitting on the floor near my feet was my daughter, Sophia. She was 6 years old. She was holding a drawing she had made. It was a picture of me and her holding hands. She was tugging on my pant leg, looking up with big, hopeful eyes. "Papa," she whispered on the screen. "Look." On the screen, I saw myself slap her hand away. I didn't even look at her. My eyes were glued to the game. "Not now, Sophia. Can't you see I'm busy? Go to your room. You are bad luck." The Sophia on the screen crumbled. Her face twisted into silent sobbing, and she walked away, dragging her drawing on the floor. The stadium around me erupted. "Goal!" The demons in the stands were jumping, high-fiving, screaming with delight. "What a defense!" they roared. "He blocked the love. He defended the idol. Goal!" My knees buckled. I fell onto the sharp metal grass, the yoke on my shoulders driving me down. "No," I sobbed. "I didn't mean it. It was just the heat of the moment." "There are no moments here," the referee hissed. "Only eternity. Next clip." The screen shifted. The date changed. Sunday, August 10th, 2019. It was the dining room table. My wife, Eleanor, was sitting there with the bills spread out. She looked tired. Her hands were shaking. "Matteo," she said softly on the screen, "we don't have enough for the electricity this month. The prices went up." I watched myself walk into the frame. I was holding a bag. Inside it was a new pair of limited edition boots, replicas of what the national team wore. They had cost half my monthly salary. "Stop nagging me!" the screen Matteo shouted. "I work hard. I deserve something for myself. God will provide, right? Isn't that what you always say? Let your God pay the bill." I watched myself throw the bill in her face and storm out to go to the bar. I saw Eleanor put her head in her hands and weep. The crowd in the stands went wild again. "Beautiful play," they chanted. "He chose the leather over the light. He chose the game over the wife. MVP, MVP." The shame was hotter than the fire. I felt like I was being skinned alive. These weren't just mistakes. These were crimes. I had sacrificed the hearts of my family on the altar of a game. I had mocked the very people God had given me to protect. I realized then that powerful testimonies I had ignored were trying to tell me exactly this, that our priorities are a matter of life and death. "Please," I begged the demon, "turn it off. I can't watch anymore." "We are just getting started," the demon sneered. "We haven't even seen the best part, the part where you rejected the captain of your soul." The screen flickered one last time. It was the morning of my death. I saw Elena in the kitchen. I saw the desperation in her eyes as she tried to show me the video on her phone. I saw the light in her eyes, a reflection of the Holy Spirit trying to reach me one last time. "Matteo, please," she said on the screen. "Just listen." I saw the sneer on my face. It was ugly. It was demonic. "I don't have time for your fairy tales." The entire stadium went silent. The demons stopped cheering. They leaned forward, savoring the moment. I watched myself walk out the door. The door slammed shut. And then, on the screen, the text appeared. "Game over." The silence was broken by a sound that I will never forget. It was the sound of laughter, but not chaotic laughter. It was synchronized, deep, mocking laughter from millions of throats. They weren't laughing at a joke. They were laughing at my stupidity. I had traded my soul for 90 minutes of entertainment. I had walked out on salvation to walk into a bar. The demon referee stepped in front of me. He reached into his pocket. "Matteo," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You played a good game for us. You were a loyal fan of the darkness. But the season is over." He pulled out the red card. It wasn't paper. It was a slab of burning iron, glowing white hot. "You are expelled from the presence of light," the demon declared. "You are expelled from rest. You are expelled from hope." He pressed the red card against my forehead. The pain was infinite. It felt like a nail being driven through my skull. I screamed, but the scream was swallowed by the roar of the crowd. They were chanting my name now. "Matteo, Matteo, one of us! One of us!" The ground beneath me began to rumble violently. The metal grass parted, revealing a hole. It wasn't a tunnel this time. It was a sheer drop into a darkness so absolute it looked like a solid object. Heat, stronger than anything I had felt before, radiated from the pit. I could hear screams coming from down there, screams that did not sound human anymore. They sounded like tearing metal. "Go to the locker room," the demon laughed, pointing to the abyss. "The manager is waiting for you." He shoved me. I fell backward. The yoke on my shoulders pulled me down like an anchor. I flailed my arms, trying to grab onto the sharp metal grass, trying to grab onto the demon's leg, trying to grab onto anything. But there was nothing. I tumbled into the void. The wind rushed past my ears, roaring like a hurricane. I was falling away from the stadium, away from the false light of the jumbotron, into the belly of the beast. As I fell, the memories of my life flashed again. But this time, not on a screen. They flashed in my heart. I saw every opportunity I had missed. I saw the church doors I walked past. I saw the tracts I threw in the trash. I saw Elena's Bible on the nightstand, gathering dust. I realized I was not a victim. I was a volunteer. I had chosen this. I had insisted on this. But in the crushing darkness, as the heat began to consume me, a thought sparked in my mind. A tiny, desperate memory. It wasn't a memory of football. It wasn't a memory of a goal. It was a memory of a phrase I had heard Elena say 1,000 times, a phrase I had mocked, a phrase I had laughed at. Jesus saves. It seemed impossible. I was already condemned. The red card had been shown. The verdict was red. I was falling into the deepest part of hell. But I had nothing left to lose. My pride was gone. My idols were broken. My jersey was ash. I was naked, guilty, and dying. I closed my eyes against the rushing wind. I stopped trying to save myself. I stopped trying to justify my life. I opened my mouth, and from the bottom of my ruined soul, I screamed. I fell into a darkness that was heavy. It was not empty space. It felt like I was sinking into black tar, a thick, suffocating substance that pressed against my eyes, my nose, and my mouth. The wind I had felt earlier vanished, replaced by a silence that was louder than the stadium. This was the silence of total separation. In the stadium above, there was torture, fire, and mocking. But down here, in the pit, there was something worse. There was the absolute absence of God. I cannot explain to you how terrifying that is. We live our lives on earth surrounded by God's grace, even if we ignore Him. We have sunlight, we have water, we have the laughter of children. Those are crumbs of His presence. Here, there were no crumbs. There was only a void that sucked the hope right out of my marrow. I felt the yoke on my shoulders dragging me down faster, deeper. It was the weight of my idolatry. Every game I prioritized over my family, every dollar I wasted on merchandise, while my wife prayed for bills to be paid, every curse word I shouted at the screen, it was all concentrated in that wooden beam. It was drowning me. My mind began to fracture. I thought of Diego on the field above, running in his eternal circle. I thought of the gods of football. In this darkness, Their names meant nothing. Their glory was ash. I realized that I had spent 45 years worshipping men who bleed, men who age, men who die. I had built my house on sand, and now the storm had swallowed me whole. I tried to breathe, but the air was solid heat. My lungs burned. I knew, with a certainty that froze my blood, that I was seconds away from the point of no return. I was crossing the threshold from which there is no redemption. I remembered Elena. I remembered the way she looked when she prayed. She didn't look frantic. She looked peaceful. She spoke to someone she knew. She spoke to a king who listened. Jesus. The name rose up in my throat like a bubble of air in deep water. It wasn't a theological conclusion. It wasn't a religious ritual. It was the desperate, terrifying realization that there was only one name in the entire universe that carried any authority here. The referee above had a red card. The demons had whips. The idols had chains. But there was one who had the keys. I fought against the suffocating pressure. I fought against the pride that had kept my mouth shut for decades. I fought against the shame that told me I was too far gone. I opened my mouth in that crushing dark. My voice was a broken, raspy croak, but I put every ounce of my remaining soul into it. Jesus! I did not say a long prayer. I did not promise to be better. I just screamed his name. I screamed it like a drowning man screams for a rope. I screamed it like a child lost in a forest screams for his father. Jesus! Save me! The effect was instantaneous and violent. The darkness did not just light up, it shattered. It was as if I had dropped a nuclear bomb into the silence. The thick, tar-like atmosphere recoiled. I heard a sound that I will never forget, a collective shriek of terror from the shadows. The demons, the presence in the pit, the very walls of that abyss screamed in fear. They did not fear me. They did not fear my anger, but they were terrified of that name. The fall stopped. It wasn't a gentle stop. It was abrupt, jarring, as if a floor had suddenly materialized beneath my feet. But there was no floor. I was suspended in the void, held by a force I could not see. The yoke on my shoulders, that heavy, barbed wire timber of my sin, began to tremble. I heard the wood cracking. I heard the iron barbs snapping. "You have no right," a voice hissed from the darkness below. It sounded ancient and furious. "He is ours. He wore the jersey. He played the game. He called the name," another voice thundered. But this voice did not come from the dark. It came from above. It came from everywhere. It sounded like the rush of many waters, like a waterfall of pure light. A beam of light pierced the darkness. It was blindingly white, hotter than the fire of hell, but without the pain. It was a purifying heat. It shot down from the opening of the pit, slicing through the gloom, and hit me squarely in the chest. I looked up. Far above, through the crack in the stadium floor, past the smog, past the screaming demons, past the red sky, I saw a hand reaching down. It was not the manicured hand of a celebrity. It was not the hand of a statue. It was a scarred hand. There was a hole in the wrist, a wound that looked fresh and ancient at the same time. The demons in the stadium above were scattering like cockroaches exposed to the sun. The chanting had stopped. The mockery had stopped. The only thing that existed was that light and that hand. I reached up. My hand was shaking. My arm felt weak, unworthy. I was a man who had used his hands to hold beer and point fingers in anger. I was a man who had pushed my daughter away. I didn't deserve to touch that hand. But the voice spoke again, resonating in my bones, louder than the roar of any crowd I had ever been part of. "I do not lose my sheep." The hand closed around my wrist. The grip was iron. It was absolute. The moment skin touched skin, the yoke on my shoulders exploded. It didn't just fall off. It disintegrated into dust. The weight of my idolatry, the weight of my sin, the weight of the wasted years, gone in a millisecond. I was pulled upward. The sensation was dizzying. We shot past the layers of the pit. We shot past the stadium. I saw the field of metal grass one last time. I saw the figures of the idols, the players, the legends, still running their eternal laps, still chasing the ball that would never satisfy them. They didn't look up. They couldn't. They were slaves to the game. But I was free. We rose higher, past the red clouds, past the atmosphere of terror. The smell of sulfur faded, replaced by a scent that made me weep. It smelled like rain. It smelled like ozone and lilies. It smelled like life. I looked at the one holding me, but I could not see his face. The light was too bright. It was a brightness that would have blinded me if I hadn't been dead. But I felt the love radiating from him. It was a love that was furious and tender. It was a love that had walked into the enemy's stadium to take back what belonged to him. I had spent my life cheering for men who didn't know I existed. Now, I was being held by the God who knew the number of hairs on my head, the God I had mocked, and he was saving me anyway. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to apologize. But the speed increased. The light became a tunnel of white fire. The sensation of a physical body returned, the pain in my chest, the cold floor, the taste of beer and bile. I was being sent back. The return was violent. It was not like waking up from a nap. It was like being thrown from a moving vehicle into a brick wall. I slammed back into my body with a force that made my back arch off the floor. The white light vanished, replaced instantly by a crushing weight on my chest and a blinding agony in my ribs. My eyes flew open, but I couldn't see anything at first, just a blur of frantic motion and blinding artificial lights. My lungs seized. They had forgotten how to work. I gasped, a desperate, hungry sound, sucking in air that tasted of stale beer, sweat, and floor cleaner. It was the filthiest, most beautiful air I had ever tasted. "He's back! We got a rhythm!" The voice was shouting right above me. I felt hands pressing hard on my chest, rhythmic and bruising. The pain was sharp. My ribs were likely cracked from the CPR. But the pain meant I was alive. The pain meant I was not falling into the pit. My vision cleared slowly. I was still on the floor of El Templo. But the world looked different now. It looked thin, like a piece of paper that could tear at any moment. I saw the face of a paramedic hovering over me, sweat dripping from his forehead. He looked terrified. "Stay with us, buddy. Breathe. Just breathe." I turned my head to the side. I saw Lucas, my drinking buddy, my fellow worshipper at the altar of football. He was standing near the bar, his hands on his head, his face pale as a sheet, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the television. I followed his gaze. The game was still on. The players were still running. The crowd on the screen was cheering. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I almost retched. I saw the green field on the screen, but I didn't see grass. I saw the jagged metal blades. I saw the players running, but I didn't see heroes. I saw men in chains. I saw the invisible demons chasing them, waiting for the final whistle to drag them down. "Turn it off," I rasped. My voice was weak, barely a whisper, but the panic behind it was absolute. "Turn it off!" The paramedic looked down at me, confused. "Relax, sir. You had a cardiac arrest. We're taking you to the hospital." "The game." I tried to lift my arm, but it felt like lead. "Turn off the game. It's a lie. It's a trap." Lucas looked at me then. "Matteo, you're okay. Man, you scared us. We thought you were gone. We missed the replay because of you." He said it as a joke, a nervous reaction to tension, but the words hit me like a knife. We missed the replay. I had just seen the replay of my life in the fires of hell, and he was worried about missing a goal. I started to cry. I lay there on the dirty floor of the bar, surrounded by empty bottles and peanut shells, and I wept like a child. I wept for Lucas. I wept for the men in the bar. I wept for the millions of souls glued to screens, cheering for their own distraction while the devil set up the snares. It burns, I whispered, closing my eyes. The applause burns. They loaded me onto the stretcher. The movement made the world spin. As they wheeled me out of the bar, I saw the faces of my friends. They looked annoyed. The ambulance was interrupting the match. I was an inconvenience to their worship. The doors of the ambulance closed, shutting out the noise of the game. Silence fell, broken only by the beep of the heart monitor and the siren wailing as we sped through the streets of Buenos Aires. I looked at my wrist. The skin was pale, dirty from the floor, but I could still feel the sensation of that grip. I could feel the heat where the hand of light had grabbed me. It wasn't a burn, it was a brand. I had been marked. I looked at the paramedic again. "What time is it?" "It's 5 hours p.m., he said, checking his watch. "You were gone for about 4 minutes, sir. Technically dead. You're a lucky man. The defibrillator brought you back on the third shock. 4 minutes. I had lived a lifetime in 4 minutes. I had seen eternity. I had felt the weight of the yoke and the heat of the pit. It wasn't luck, I whispered, staring at the ceiling of the ambulance. It was over time. I realized then that I was living on borrowed time. The Mateo who walked into that bar had died. He was gone. The man lying on this stretcher was a new creature, pulled from the fire, smelling of smoke, terrified and grateful. I thought of Elena. My heart seized in my chest, not from a heart attack, but from fear. What if I had died without telling her she was right? What if I had died leaving her with the memory of my anger? "Phone," I croaked. "Please, my wife." The paramedic shook his head. "You need to rest, sir. Your heart is very unstable." "I don't care about my heart!" I struggled against the straps. "I need to tell her. I need to tell her Jesus saves. I need to tell her I saw him." The paramedic exchanged a look with the driver. They thought I was delirious. They thought the lack of oxygen had scrambled my brain. They didn't know that for the first time in 45 years my brain was finally clear. I lay back, the tears running into my ears. I began to pray. I didn't know how to pray properly. I didn't know the fancy words the priests used. I just talked to the one who had pulled me out. "Lord," I thought, "I am a construction worker. I am a fool. I built my life on a game. I ignored you. I mocked your daughter. And you still reached down. Why? Why me?" I felt a peace settle over me in that speeding ambulance. It was the same peace I had seen on Elena's face all those years. It was the assurance that the red card had been torn up. The penalty had been paid, not by me, but by the one with the hole in his wrist. But I also felt a burden, a new weight, not the yoke of sin, but the weight of responsibility. I had seen what waits for those who make idols of this world. I had seen the destination of the proud. And I knew with terrifying clarity that I could not keep this silence. The stadium was full. The stands were packed. The world was watching the game, unaware that the field was trapped. I had to go back and warn them. I had to tell them that the trophy is a lie. The ambulance slowed down. The doors opened. We were at the hospital. As they wheeled me into the emergency room, the bright lights overhead reminded me of the tunnel. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to start the real match, the one that actually matters. The recovery in the hospital was slow. My body was broken, my ribs fractured from the CPR, my heart weak. But my spirit was healing for the first time in my life. When Elena walked into the room, she looked terrified. She expected to find the same man who had left the house that morning, angry, obsessed, distant. She stood by the door, clutching her purse, afraid to speak. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the lines on her face that my neglect had put there. I saw the grey hairs that my shouting had caused. "Eleanor," I said. My voice was raspy, hurting my throat. She stepped closer. "Mateo, how are you feeling?" I reached out and took her hand. It was trembling. "You were right," I whispered. Tears began to blur my vision again. The videos, the testimonies, you were right about everything. She froze. She had waited 20 years to hear those words. She didn't say anything. She just collapsed into the chair next to the bed and buried her face in my hand, weeping. I cried with her. It was the first time we had prayed together, even though we didn't use words. We just cried. That was our altar. A week later, I went home. Walking into my house was the hardest thing I have ever done. As I stepped into the living room, the smell hit me, not sulfur, but the smell of old habits. And then I saw it. The shrine. My living room walls were covered in framed jerseys. The shelves were lined with trophies, bobbleheads, and signed balls. The television, the altar where I had sacrificed my family, sat in the center, black and silent. My son ran up to me, holding a soccer ball. "Papa, you're back! Did you see the goal? Did you see the replay?" I looked at the ball in his hands. I didn't see a toy. I saw a training tool for the arena I had just escaped. I gently took the ball from him and set it down. "We are not going to talk about the game, son," I said softly. "Papa has a new team now." I didn't wait. I couldn't wait. If I let those things stay in my house one more night, I felt the demons would have a legal right to return. I grabbed a trash bag from the kitchen. Eleanor watched me, wide-eyed. "Matteo, what are you doing? That jersey, it's signed. It's worth a fortune." "It's worth nothing," I said, pulling the framed shirt off the wall. "It cost me my soul. That is too high a price." I smashed the glass. I ripped the jersey out of the frame. The sound of the tearing fabric was the best sound I had ever heard. It sounded like freedom. I threw it into the bag. I went room to room. The posters of the legends? Trash. The scarves? Trash. The limited edition DVDs of the World Championships? Trash. I didn't sell them. You don't sell poison to your neighbor. You destroy it. I took the bags out to the alley behind the house. I doused them in lighter fluid. As I struck the match, I felt a sudden cold wind brush against my neck. A final angry hiss from the enemy who was losing his grip. I dropped the match. The flames roared up, consuming the polyester and the plastic. I watched the faces of my idols melt. I watched the logos turn to black smoke. And as the smoke rose, I felt the yoke finally, truly lift. I am a different man now. I still work construction. I still lay bricks. But my Sundays are different. I don't go to El Templo. I go to a small church with Elena. I sit in the front row. When the music starts, I lift my hands. I don't care if I look foolish. I used to paint my face blue and scream for men who didn't know my name. Why should I be ashamed to sing for the God who pulled me out of the fire? I still see my old friends sometimes. Lucas passed me on the street the other day. He looked tired. He started talking about the new season, about the transfers, about the odds. I stopped him. I looked him in the eye. "Lucas," I said, "the game is a lie. The stadium is a trap." He laughed. He thought I was joking. He walked away, shaking his head. I watched him go, and my heart broke. I saw the invisible chains around his neck. I saw the yoke on his shoulders. He thinks he is just a fan. He doesn't know he is a prisoner. That is why I'm telling you this. Before I end, I want to ask you to please make sure you are subscribed to this channel. This message needs to reach more people, and by being here, you are helping to warn them. Listen to me closely. You might not like football. Maybe your idol is a singer. Maybe it is a politician. Maybe it is your own reflection in the mirror. It doesn't matter what the idol looks like. The result is the same. The enemy wants you to pour your passion, your money, and your time into things that cannot save you. He wants you to be so busy cheering for the world that you don't hear the whistle blow for the end of your life. And the whistle will blow, for all of us. When you close your eyes for the last time, no trophy will help you. No autograph will vouch for you. The crowd will not be there to cheer you on. You will stand alone. And in that moment, only one thing will matter. Did you wear the jersey of the world? Or were you washed in the blood of the Lamb? I know what I found in the dark. I know what waits in the stadium of flesh. Do not buy the ticket. Do not play the game. Jesus is the only way out of the tunnel. Run to him. Run while you still have breath.